I just thought that I would start a business and I would do it forever, so I never really had an end goal for myself. And I wish I would have probably put a little bit more thought into what I really wanted to get out of the business when I started it.
This is the Staying Power Podcast, a show that explores the challenges business owners face as they grow. I'm Brandon Hall.
And I'm Thomas Castelli.
And together we ask the tough questions to show you that running a business is not for the faint of heart. But if you have staying power, you'll overcome your challenges and achieve lasting success.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Staying Power Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. We're joined with Ryan Lazanis, who is an accounting firm owner based out of Canada, who started a virtual accounting firm and sold it about 5 years after starting his firm. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But before we do, we just want to discuss some of the highlights from today's episode.
Yeah, it was fun interviewing Ryan. We're really big on remote firms, and Ryan took his firm, Xen Accounting, from start to finish. So he did successfully start a virtual firm and sell a virtual firm. And you'll hear too that he thinks that you can sell virtual firms at a premium compared to traditional firms. So it was just good confirmation that if you are moving to remote, your firm could be sold at a premium because you're using technology, you're implementing efficiencies, and you're focused on results. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you'll hear us talk about results and holding employees accountable to results and driving results for clients throughout this interview. And at the end of the day, that's got to translate to value.
Absolutely. And, I loved how he was talking a little bit about how the hardest thing for him was the first hire, because it's really hard for people to buy into you and your vision when you're just starting out and really, I guess, trust that you're legitimate and you actually have to get that traction. So that was interesting. And also I thought another interesting thing he talked about was the hiring for attitude question. And those are definitely some things we're going to have to check out.
Absolutely. Well, let's just jump right into it. Let's bring Ryan on.
Ryan, thanks for taking the time to come on the show today. Would you be able to give our listeners a little information on your background?
Absolutely. And Brandon and Thomas, thanks a lot for having me here today. So my name is Ryan Lazanis. I'm a CPA from Montreal, Canada, born and raised here. I started my accounting career in a pretty small traditional accounting firm here in Montreal. I always really gravitated towards the smaller operations. I felt I was a little bit more entrepreneurial at a younger age, and I never applied to the Big Four or anything like that. I really started my career at a firm that was 5 people, and I like that because I was able to see the full cycle of a business and really work directly with business owners. And so I worked there for about 5-6 years. I went into industry briefly after obtaining my CPA designation. I was an assistant controller at a medical company for about 6 months. That really did not mesh well with what I was looking for out of my career. I felt it was very routine, repetitive, and obviously very accounting oriented. And I'm someone that doesn't really, I actually don't even enjoy accounting or tax. I studied it. That's where my experience is, but I don't think I'm great at it, truthfully, and I don't really like it. I like the business side of things. And when I was looking for something to do next, I always knew I wanted to start a business. I just didn't know what it would be. And all my training and education was in accounting. So I was like, okay, I got to do something with that. But I was really frustrated with the profession. I was frustrated with the lack of progress. I thought that the accounting firm model was very old school, archaic. I was just disillusioned with that whole model. And I decided to create a new kind of model in Canada at the time, which was an online firm. I started a firm on my own called Xen Accounting in 2013. It was one of the first online firms in the country. And the idea was really to make accounting easier for small business owners. So connect virtually, use some of these cloud tools that most people are familiar with now, but wasn't really well known in Canada and the US at that time. And really just focus on how can I help create a better customer experience, because we all know that business owners generally don't like their accounting. So I started as a one-man show. I grew the firm to about 15 people over a 5-year period. And that firm was acquired in 2018 by a larger corporate services firm based out of Europe. And I helped them transition things over for most of 2019. And then I started Future Firm, which is my current venture, which essentially helps firm leaders adopt an online, automated, scalable model of their own. I do a bit of one-to-one mentoring, but most of what I do is really on the content side of things. I really enjoy the online marketing side of things. I'm really grooming myself to be a bit more of a marketer right now, just putting out some free content via my blog, podcast, and one of my most popular pieces of content is a weekly newsletter that I put out, which I send to over 1,600 firm leaders that are interested in modernizing their firm. And I give tips that I've used to help kind of build and scale my own firm. I kind of provide that in a weekly digest email. And a bit of a shameless plug here, if any accounting professionals are interested in taking a look at that, you can head on over to futurefirm.co/top5. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a rundown, and I didn't go too long there, but yeah, that's kind of my background.
No, thank you. Thank you. And when you first started Xen Accounting, what was the goal? What was the end goal? Was it always to sell that firm, or was it what was it?
You know what? That was probably, when I'm speaking to firms now, I'm relating back to what I maybe wish I would have thought more about. And I never thought about the end goal. So I started without actually having a goal. Like, my goal was really, how could I make accounting as easy as possible for small businesses? But I never thought about, what is my goal? Like, what do I want to get out of my business? And I never thought about selling the business. I just thought that I would start a business and I would do it forever, So I never really had an end goal for myself. So certainly selling the firm was not top of mind for me. And I wish I would have probably put a little bit more thought into what I really wanted to get out of the business when I started it.
Can we dive into that a little bit? Why should you think about that at the beginning? I guess looking back, going through the acquisition, I'm sure that there were challenges that you faced that if you would have thought about it from the beginning, you probably could have fixed from the beginning. But talk to us a little bit about that. Why do you make that statement that you wish you would have thought about the end goal from the get-go?
I think it has to do with modeling a business around your lifestyle. And I was growing something for the sake of growth, which maybe did not mesh with what I really wanted to get out of life. Like, there's nothing wrong with growth, but growth for the sake of growth is, there has to be something more to it, right? It's not just about more clients and more employees and more this and more that. Like, there has to be something bigger than that behind it, right? And I was kind of losing track of, you get really busy, you know what it's like to run a business, and maybe you get like trapped into things that maybe you're doing more often than not that you don't want to do. And, certainly I was seeing that that was maybe the path that I was on. And a lot of it had to do with inexperience, because I had no experience in anything that I was doing. I was learning the ropes as I went. And, maybe it would have been very hard for me to know what I wanted that outcome to be, or exactly how I wanted to model my business at the outset the first time around. But now I'm going through my second time around with Future Firm. I'm like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do in my business. This is exactly where I want to be spending my time. I'm modeling it from the ground up to be exactly what I want it to be, after seeing some of the things that I went through the first time around.
When you were building this business and you were doing accounting for folks, like, I know you mentioned you didn't really like accounting. Mm-hmm. Were you a solopreneur when you just started? Did you do it by yourself, or how did you end up like kind of growing from there?
Yeah, super tough. So like I said, I started on my own, started from scratch, had 0 clients, had no idea what I was doing. I was maybe, so I'm 36 now and almost 37. And I started it probably when I was 28, 29. So relatively inexperienced. And I was, like I said, on my own and had to do the A to Z, right? I had to do everything. So I had to do people's taxes, people's financial statements, do the marketing, do the networking, like everything. And the absolute hardest thing, I think, is to make that first hire, especially when I had no clue how to hire and I'd never managed anyone in my life and knew nothing about it. That first hire was exceptionally difficult. Getting people on board with your business when it's just starting out, when maybe you're a little bit less experienced, that's really hard, because it's tough to join a smaller organization that's maybe 1 or 2 people or even 3 people, So people have to buy into you. They have to buy into the vision. So I think that was one of the hardest things, is getting those first few key people involved and keeping them there.
When did your firm go virtual? Did it start off virtual, remote, or did you transition to remote at some later point?
So it started from day one operating completely virtually with clients. So even if they were down the street, like we wouldn't meet with them in person. We had to operate kind of like we're doing right now. But the whole team was centralized in a physical location. I felt that if you wanted to build a strong team culture, you have to do it when you're together, and like there's those little water cooler moments and stuff like that. But gradually, there were some circumstances that led to us slowly moving into a hybrid model and then seeing, okay, well, people are working pretty well remotely. Let's just start hiring remote. And then we went like full remote. Probably started going towards a hybrid model like year 2. And then like year 3 or year 4, we were 100% remote.
And how did that challenge your beliefs on culture building? Because you just said that you believed that you had to have the team physically together to get those water cooler moments. So you go virtual, you don't have that anymore. What do you do to build culture?
Well, and I also think it had to do with my inexperience as well, because as someone that never managed someone, like I would have no idea what to do managing someone remotely. So at least I had someone in the office and there was that like chitter chatter back and forth. But I saw that like, okay, now I have like some control of what's going on in the business. Okay, we have like one individual that wanted to was moving away. So we had to like allow that person to work remotely. Then we saw, okay, here are some of the things that weren't working smoothly. So like for the next person, we would like implement like better processes. So it's really firmly entrenched with like having very strong processes. If you want to have a remote team, you can't have a remote team without very strong processes and the right tools. We already had the tools. It was just about putting in place the processes. And the process was mostly around how do you maintain the culture? Like you have to force those kind of like with the water cooler talk in an office, it comes naturally, right? Culture can kind of like grow naturally. Obviously, you need to direct it, but when you're a remote team, you need to really be very intentional about how you're going to implement processes to keep culture together.
When you do that, when you got the processes all together, how do you make sure that everybody in a virtual environment is on the same page with the process and actually operating those processes effectively?
Yeah, and just to expand on this, because this is like my favorite piece.
All right.
You mentioned that hiring people is tough. You mentioned that you had people physically together in an office, and then you moved to virtual, which makes the management piece tough. I mean, people in services businesses are like the number one thing, and figuring out how to manage those people is so challenging. At least that's been our challenge from day one. Is how do you really effectively add clarity, set expectations, and then manage to those expectations? So how'd you do it? Tell us how that worked.
Yeah. I think look, if we could boil it down to the absolute basics, my expectations were quite simple. It's you do your thing. You want to take a plane somewhere. You want to go work from Mexico. You want to do whatever you want. I don't care. What I care about is at the beginning of the month, we do a little bit of planning. Like we engage in capacity and workload planning. And we'd say, okay, this is on your plate. Does this look good to you? Are you okay with this? These are the deadlines. Get these done on time. Make the clients happy. Do your thing. So there wasn't like a 200-page rule book. And truthfully, like there's probably things I could have done better, but it was really about you do whatever you want. I don't care what you do. You want to work from here. You want to work from there. You want to wear a t-shirt. You want to wear a suit. I don't care what you do. But clients have to be happy and these deadlines have to be hit. If you could do that, we're all good. And then that's like the task and workload part of things. And then it's a matter of how do you keep the team together? How do you make sure that everyone feels like they're part of something? I think it's important that a company has like a vision or something that people know that they're working towards. They're not just doing a tax return or a financial statement or month-end books. They're working to, a bigger goal. And instituting some of the processes that we had were very simple about like we'd have a weekly team meeting on Zoom where everyone had to be part of the meeting on Zoom. Everyone would participate in the meeting. Everyone would get a sense of what's going on in the business in key areas. And then we'd have like other types of meetings throughout the week that were optional meetings, but most people chose to attend, which were more about like, okay, what are you doing this weekend? What did you do on the weekends? Things of that nature more. So we forced the water cooler talk for people that wanted to attend, and most people wanted to attend. So little things like that to keep things gelled together were processes that were implemented.
Sounds like your management style was very much results focused, right? Get your work done. It doesn't matter where you do it, how you do it, as long as it's done. and then participate in the team culture building event, which is very much how we like to manage our staff too. But what happens if you need to change the results a little bit? Well, what happens if you realize, ooh, these are not the actual results that I want to drive? Or how do you know that people are giving it their all, working a full work week or adding the value that you need them to add?
Yeah. So I never had timesheets. So I never really cared about the inputs. I only cared about the outputs. I'm not a super KPI heavy guy, truthfully, and that's probably something I could improve upon. So I think there's a ton of other KPIs that you can implement that can help track certain metrics that might be important for a service sector business if you're not tracking time, like turnaround time and, net promoter scores and stuff like that. So there's those kind of metrics that I think you can implement. Truthfully, I was not really KPI heavy. Like there's a lot of things that, like, look, I built the business in 5 or 6 years. It's still a really young business that there's things I would have improved upon, if it wasn't acquired and if I was still part of the organization. So certainly there's things I could have improved upon there. But for me, it was really about client has to be happy, deadlines have to be hit, work has to be good quality. And that's it. I think there's a few things that we tested for in the recruitment process that brought on board people with good judgment and that were humble and they were open, and we were able to talk to the team on a variety of different matters without people's feelings getting hurt. And I think that helped overall as well.
And, when you're doing accounting, accuracy counts, right? So when you were in the hiring process, did you end up hiring people who already understood how to do full cycle accounting and bookkeeping and all of that? Or did you end up having to hire people and then train them on a way to do that?
I mean, depends what kind of person we'd be hiring, obviously. If we want a CPA, they need to know the technical stuff. But truthfully, I would never really test the technical. And I would prefer someone that is a fit culturally over someone that has those technical skills, because technical skills you can teach. So the attitude was more important and the cultural fit was much more important. And a lot of the times we had to retrain people, repurpose, some people would come from big audit firms, like the Big Four. And, they'd have 5 years of experience as a CPA in the Big Four, but that experience was not really transferable. So we would have to retrain them literally from the ground up. This is how you do a month end. This is how you do the bookkeeping. This is how you deal with these kind of things. And I'd be okay with doing that. I'd be okay investing in that if I felt they were a very good long-term cultural fit. So a lot of the time we would have to train from the ground up. And, that wasn't really an issue for me.
And when you trained from the ground up, how did you did you do it like a group? Did you do group training, live training? How did you actually go about doing the training?
I mean, it was one at a time because, we'd hire someone and then, we would have group trainings for certain topics, but every single person that joined the firm would have to do bookkeeping for the first few months. Every single person, because the core of what we did was keeping control of the integrity of the data and managing systems and processes and apps. That was the core of it all. So everyone would have to be an expert in the bookkeeping. Even we had our software engineer, who was our technology lead. He would have to learn the bookkeeping for the first few months as well, because how is he going to, how is he going to be in a position to evaluate different apps and be in a position to help automate certain workflows if he didn't understand the core and the basics of it all? And I think that I probably, learned a little bit about that from, there's a book from Zappos. What is it? Discovering Happy. What is it? It could have been something
along those lines.
Yeah. And every single person in their company had to sit on the phones for the first month and deal with customer service, So there was a little bit of that in there, I guess, but every single person had to do the books.
How long would you make them do bookkeeping for before they could jump into their actual job role?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be full time on the books, but I mean, it could be depending on how immersed they would need to be and involved, and generally it wasn't full time. Depending on that software engineer, he was not doing full time bookkeeping, but he had a few bookkeeping clients, and he would be the first point of contact with those clients, and he would handle the customer service that came along with it. That was core as well, the customer service aspect of things. So, it could be at least 10 hours a week of bookkeeping.
Interesting. Okay. So your virtual firm, you're hiring people. It's hard to hire people in a virtual firm. It's hard to manage people in a virtual firm. Did you ever run into an instance where you hired somebody and you realized shortly afterwards that they weren't quite up to the task? And if so, how'd you handle it?
Yeah. So I think early on, when we started hiring virtually, we didn't think, well, some people maybe not well suited to working virtually for a variety of different reasons. And maybe they think they like the idea of it, but when they start actually doing it, it's just not jiving. Maybe they don't have a good work area at home, or there's too many distractions, or maybe they miss like that office vibe, let's say. So certainly I think the first remote hire that we had was along those lines where we didn't even test for that. We didn't even consider those kinds of things. So that's on us, and she came to us one day. It's like, yeah, this is just not working out. That's like a month, 2 months into it, which is not what you want, because there's a lot of time and money that goes into like that whole, few month process to get somebody on board. So whenever a mistake happened, it was an opportunity to make sure that we would patch that up in the future and make sure that we wouldn't do that again.
All right. So shifting gears to maybe a different side of the business a little bit, virtual firm, first time it's been done in Canada. How did you originally start getting businesses, and what challenges did you face acquiring customers when you first started?
So again, like I said, I started really from scratch. I had no idea how to land a client. And I figured the best way to go about it, and nobody knew me, was to just go out to networking meetings and find as many networking meetings as possible and just go there and talk to people. And it doesn't always come across, but I'm actually a very shy and introverted person. So that was a very, I didn't enjoy going to those networking meetings very much, at least at the beginning, because I found it very awkward and uncomfortable. You're just going up to people and striking up conversations. It's not really my style. But I remember I went to this one networking, the first networking meeting I went to, it was early in the morning. And the first person I spoke with says, "Oh, what do you do?" I'm like, "Well, I have an online accounting firm, and we use cloud tools to help provide a more automated accounting service." It's like, "Oh, that's really cool. We should talk." So we spoke and ended up signing him pretty much a few days later. And I remember this was when I was accepting checks, which was very, very early on in the firm. But I remember I got the first check in the mail. I was like, wow, I'm getting paid for doing this. This is pretty cool. So it was really at the beginning about really hitting those networking events up and just going to as many as possible. And I discovered that there was some type of events that were working well, others that didn't. And the ones that worked well were the tech startup events, because in 2013, the main question about cloud accounting was, is it safe? And most businesses weren't comfortable with cloud accounting, except the technology companies. So that's where I really built my niche and my expertise. And that worked well for me because I really liked disruption and innovation and technology. So that really interested me as well. So that's kind of how it started for me.
And did you ever transition into content marketing or information marketing or anything like that? Because your story resonates with me. I'm pretty much the exact same way. I go to these networking events and I kind of shy away into the corner and don't really want to talk to anybody. And then it clicked for me one day. I was like, I can write content that'll be seen by 5,000 people. And I'd rather spend an hour doing that personally, than going to networking events. Did you ever transition into any of that?
I completely agree with you on that. And I was burning myself out going to all these network events. You know what? I'm happy I did it, because I became kind of known in that tech startup space as this is a modern accounting firm, So I'm happy I did that. But then I started early on writing a blog post, and I don't know what prompted me to write a blog post, but I wanted to just write about what I was seeing and feeling in the industry. And I think the first blog post I wrote, which kind of peed a few people off, most of the more traditional accountants, was online accounting and the death of a dinosaur. And the dinosaur was traditional accounting firms. And I didn't even know what I was doing blogging. I was just writing ideas down and thoughts. And I had no strategy. I just wrote it down and posted it. And some people noticed it and they're like, "Oh, I like that." And then I was like, okay, I can get some attention here. And then I did another thing like that. And I realized that my efforts in blogging, like I literally have built my businesses off of blogging. So like Future Firm and Xen Accounting, like it all really came from blogging. And I'm like, just like you said, why am I going to go bang my head against like these networking events and maybe get a client after going to like 10 of them, maybe? Or I could put out like with that same amount of energy, I could put out like many, many blog posts that like hundreds or even thousands of people can see if I do it properly. So that's where all my energy went to on the marketing side of things once I figured that out.
And as you scaled the firm, scaling a business is tough because your time and your energy gets pulled in many, many, many different directions. So how did you maintain consistency with content marketing as you scaled?
Like, are you saying that like, how did I find the time for that? Or I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. You know, I go through a tough week at work, running the firm, and I'm just exhausted and I have zero time and energy to actually produce the content. How do you make sure you can maintain some consistency?
I think like few things. I mean, I probably should have studied marketing, when I was younger rather than accounting. I'm probably more like inclined towards marketing and sales. And I think that's what I really liked the most out of the business. So I would find time to do it. But very early on, I built myself out of a lot of the client work because I'm just not a great accountant. And I hired people to do that instead. And I said, just do your thing, like you have the qualifications, like you're the one I'm going to go to for answers there. Like, don't come to me for those answers. So I built myself out of that pretty early on so that I could focus on some of the marketing type stuff. And you know what? I always wanted to do more marketing. I never did a ton of it. My primary concern was always like managing capacity and making sure whatever comes in is going to be adequately delivered. And I think another thing that you can do, and this is really what I'm doing with Future Firm now, because I put a lot of content out, is you have a time of day where your brain works best, and like certain types of tasks you have to schedule in that time. And if you don't, it's probably not going to get done, right? So if I'm like doing anything creative, if I'm not doing it in the morning, it's not going to happen, because by the afternoon, I'm like here and there and like all over the place. So it has to do with like kind of understanding like where are you at your peak performance and like what should you be doing at that time. And the creative stuff is like when I do in the morning. And this is why we're probably doing this podcast in the afternoon because this is the time when, we could, when I'm in meetings and stuff like that. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it.
I have to kind of agree with that. In some ways, there's all different types of ways people can do it. Some people work better in the morning. Some people work better if they just get stuff done first. But there's definitely a time of day that you have to schedule and block off in order to get some of these things done. Otherwise, to your point, it'll just never happen. And we ask this question to everybody who comes on to this podcast. And that is, was there any particular challenge that you faced when scaling Xen Accounting that it was so bad, so treacherous that you almost threw your hands up and said, this is it. I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm going to go back to that assistant controller job?
Wow. How many times have I thought that? A lot, probably. I think one of the hardest things I had was actually finding some tax help. There's like some really experienced tax help at a small firm. It's really hard. And it's a different kind of personality. Like a tax profile, in my opinion, is a different kind of personality and is, I think, quite well suited to a lot of the larger firms for a variety of reasons. So it was really hard finding tax help. And I was really banging my head against the wall over and over and over. And so, there's a few instances, brought some tax people on, they wouldn't work out after like 2 months, after a month, there was a bit of turnover there. So that was a really, really tough one. I was super frustrated with that. So that's something that comes to mind.
So explain the cause for the turnover. Were they just not high quality, or they just couldn't really cut it in a virtual environment? What was the deal there?
I think there's a little bit of not necessarily the quality, certainly brought some people on. I think at a smaller organization, people generally have to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, right? And I'm not saying tax people aren't entrepreneurial. That's a big generalization. But usually they go into tax for a particular reason because they want to be the best tax person out there. And taxes, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of complexity to it. And, you want to learn from other really good tax professionals. And there's just so much complexity to it that when you're going to be that tax person coming into a small firm, like you're already at the top. And getting that experience over and above that is going to be tough. So you have to be comfortable with where you're at. Sure, there's other ways you could learn. You could go to courses and seminars and stuff like that. But actually getting significantly above that might be difficult. So I think that was the main barrier for a lot of people wanting to actually enter. And that's really the thing that comes to mind. And so it was just a mismatch in terms of like the nature of the firm and what we would do, because we wouldn't do super complex tax stuff, and like what generally tax professionals are looking for out of their career.
How long did you struggle with the tax piece of it?
A long time. A long time.
Well,
yeah.
How did you solve it?
We had one individual who I would call my friend, and he'd come in and then he'd say, "Okay, Ryan, I got this really good opportunity to learn from one of the best in the city." He'd leave, he'd come back in. So there was a little bit of that, and then he ended up becoming a permanent fixture, and he's still at the firm to this day.
So you basically found a way to either, it sounds like maybe get somebody that was really experienced or get them the training under somebody that was really experienced. And that was kind of the resolution to this.
I think it was more about pitching, how could we help provide education and support and training outside of the firm? And also pitch there's a number of benefits to joining a remote firm. And one of them is lifestyle. And one of them is being able to spend more time with your family. And that was one of the main pitches that were being made to some of these more experienced CPAs out there is you don't have to work that 80-hour work week and go crazy in the busy seasons. Here's some of the benefits that you're going to get at a smaller organization. Sure, you might miss out on this, and this, but you're going to have to balance that against what's more important. And we're giving you work-life balance, more time with your family, no commuting, all that kind of stuff. And that was certainly the big pitch for a lot of the more experienced CPAs.
Which I think is important because that experienced tax person can be expensive, right?
Yeah.
And at least in my experience, you start off less expensive, hoping that it'll work out. And then you kind of realize, we really do need somebody that's going to be a little bit more expensive, or I really need to invest in somebody that I believe can get to that point. But like you, I think you have to kind of go through years of pain
yes.
to really understand that effectively.
Yeah.
And understand the value that person can really bring to the table.
And another few mistakes that I made actually was bringing people in. A lot of people are interested in that kind of work-life balance and the remote work and all that kind of stuff. And when you're a small organization, when I was 1, 2, or 3 people, you could only afford so much. So some people were you know what, I really want this, and I'm okay with taking a pay cut. And some of the pay cuts were really big. And then I realized after a certain period of time, that's going to come to the forefront. And I learned from that mistake is don't give someone a significant pay cut, because that will come probably bite you a little bit later down the road. And sometimes when I would see some people coming in and say, I'm willing to take a big pay cut, I'm I'm going to bump you up from where you're saying you want to be, because I know what's going to happen based on my experience. So sometimes that was a few mistakes that I made, was giving some people too big of a pay cut because they like the idea of that flexibility. And, that was a few mistakes I made early on as well.
So you mentioned earlier that, virtual employees, they have to kind of have different characteristics. They have to be able to fit into a virtual environment. I'm wondering if you ever experienced issues with promoting this. Hey, you get the autonomy, you get the flexibility. Did that turn into problems showing up in driving the results for some employees?
That's a good point, but I think it goes down to the recruitment process as well. What are you testing for in that recruitment process? So I think there was a few things that we would test for on the accountability side of things to make sure that people actually took accountability for their actions. So there's a few things that we would test for in the recruitment process.
How do you test for accountability in the recruitment process? And this is a selfish question.
Yeah. Okay. How could I say this? I think one of the most important questions, I think when it comes to, based on, the reading that I've done, someone that is humble is able to perceive their own actions. Okay. And that person is generally accountable. So humble is a characteristic and was one of my biggest values people had to be humble if they were going to be joining the firm. Okay, so how could you test for humbleness? Well, there's a few ways. I think the easiest way is, does someone take responsibility for mistakes that they've made? Okay, so like a very simple question is like, tell me about a very big mistake that you made. And if someone is very honest with their answer, they'd say, I did this wrong, it's on me. But if someone starts giving an answer and they start going in a direction where they're saying, I did this, but it's because of this happening, and it's because this person maybe didn't do that. And like, then I'm saying, okay, well, maybe they're not taking responsibility for their own actions. So perhaps they're not accountable. One of the biggest questions that I would ask, though, was from a book called Hiring for Attitude. And there was a question called the coachability question. And I can't remember the exact series of steps to this question because there was like 4, but if you Google it, you can find it, like hiring for attitude, coachability question. And it was the one question where, in addition to the tell me about your biggest mistake question, if someone didn't pass this coachability question, they would not be joining the firm. So those were the 2 biggest questions for me. And the coachability question basically tests for whether someone is coachable. And coachability is one of the biggest reasons why people do not work out in an organization. So you want to test if they are coachable or not, because if someone makes a mistake once, well, if they're coachable, they're able to correct their actions going forward. And that kind of goes hand in hand with accountability as well. Like if something doesn't go right one time, if there's an issue with something, you coach them about how to do it correctly or what not to do in the future, then a coachable individual will make those corrections going forward. So those were 2 things that I would really test for in the recruitment process.
That makes a lot of sense. Coachability is always a big thing. So I think we're going to have to look up that book, Hiring for Attitude, and look up what that question is. There's one other aspect of your story I think is important to touch on, because there's a lot of business owners out there who start with the end goal in mind to sell their business. And I think you achieve that, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Would you just be able to take us through a little bit about how you sold your business? Were you approached by somebody? How did that go? And were there any challenges in the sale?
The biggest challenge was me getting comfortable with selling. I think as an online firm, one of the first movers in Canada, and as things trend towards cloud accounting, there was a lot of firms that were interested in acquiring that kind of expertise. And I was getting approached by a number of firms for several years, and I'd have some very preliminary discussions with some firms, and then more and more would start approaching, and I was like, okay, well, there's something here. And then it's about, okay, do I want to sell? Is it a good time to sell? What would I do next? Is the timing right? All those kind of questions. And then once I came to the realization that, okay, you know what? I'm okay with selling. I think maybe selling right now would be a good thing because there's this other thing that I think I could do that would be super interesting. And then I said, I have all these people that have approached me. Let's kind of open the net up a little bit more. And I listed it with a broker. And that's how this particular acquisition took place.
Interesting. So you went full blown broker at the end of the day. You had a lot of requests, which maybe even gave you the confidence to go ahead and pull the trigger. But you went the broker route, which is that's interesting.
Yeah.
How was that experience?
It was a positive experience. It was a positive experience because, again, I was really inexperienced. I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know what the first steps would be, and they were helpful. And so I'm happy I went down that path. Like, would I do it again in a second instance? Well, with the experience that I have, perhaps not. But certainly in that first instance, I am happy I did. So it's something that I could recommend. If you're not experienced with it, you might want to get some help.
That makes a lot of sense. So what did the broker, what did they do to make the experience of selling it or make it easier for you?
I think just kind of explain this is what happens. Okay. And now we're in this stage of the negotiation. Now we're going to have to do this. And they were a good, in between, they would manage, I'd be on one side, the buyer would be on the other side. So they were a good, in between. So it was a good dynamic, I thought. There's a lot of things that popped up that I had never seen before. So, they would explain and, have my best interests at heart and that kind of thing.
I just wanted to ask, from a valuation perspective, most CPA firms are 1 to 1.5 revenue. Does a virtual firm align with that, or do you see higher values?
Yeah, this was a 10 times revenue. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Everybody's going to go run virtual CPA firms after that.
Just kidding. You know what? Look, that's the number one question I get asked. I can't provide any information there. Unfortunately, I have to respect confidentiality. Look, I think 1 times revenue is the going rate, and it's been the going rate for a long period of time. I think you're going to see online firms go for a premium, and I think you're going to see more and more of those traditional firms that are paper heavy, that don't have a streamlined model. I think they're going to be going below 1 times revenue. So I think we're going to see both ends of the spectrum, where there's a lot of firms that if they don't adopt these more modern practices, that 1 times revenue that they're thinking they're going to retire on, it might not be so secure given all the changes happening. So it might dip below that 1 times revenue. And I think it's certainly possible to go above that 1 times revenue. Just how much? I mean, some firms believe that there's a tech startup type valuation that can be applied to their model. I'm not so sure about that. You're not going to get a 5 times revenue for your firm, in my opinion, but certainly I think you can get a nice premium.
Very good. So going through the sale process, finalizing it, what is one thing that you would have definitely had done differently if you would have started with the sale in mind?
That's a good question. You might have stumped me there. If I had the sale in mind from the beginning, I mean, the valuation is typically a function of revenue. So what could I do to I never had any crazy work weeks. I never worked crazy hours. I was very, very busy. Don't get me wrong, but maybe I would have pushed it a little bit more, knowing that okay, at this point I'm going to be selling. Maybe I would have pushed it a little bit more. Who knows?
No, this is all great insights for everybody out there who's looking to sell their firms. And one thing I do want to point out, I mean, it sounds like what you said before, for firms trading below that valuation, there might be some opportunities in there to just thinking like the real estate investor, right? Come in there and value add, fix up their processes, get that valuation up, and then go ahead and flip that firm. So
yeah. And that's I speak to a lot of firms where they have that on their mind. Most firms owners I speak with, they're like, I want to sell it at some point. I have it in, a lot of firm owners have that in their head where they want to sell. I never had it in my head personally, but a lot of them say, I'm going to build it up, I'm going to sell it. Well, if you're going to do that and that's your end goal, then why not put all the right pieces in place to make it as valuable as possible? And if you're just doing financial statements and a tax return, you're not maximizing your value at that point.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today. I know we're kind of coming close to time. Would you be able to tell our listeners the best way to learn more about you and what you're currently up to today?
Yeah, so the very best place is to hop on my weekly newsletter. That's probably the most popular thing I'm doing at the moment. So for any accounting professionals out there that are interested in getting the latest scoop and what's happening in the industry, I give tips and tricks and strategies about, how I scaled my firm in my newsletter. So, they can head on over to futurefirm.co/top5 like the number, and they get access to my personal email there as well. So I'm routinely going back and forth with some of my readers, and I'm really enjoying that aspect of things. I'm enjoying the new dynamic that I have as well. So I wasn't sure what it was going to look like because I was going to be building another business from scratch, but I'm really enjoying the new dynamic I have. So yeah, that's been fun.
Fantastic. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drop those links in the show notes for everybody who is listening, and want to thank Ryan again for taking the time out today. It was an exciting episode, learned a lot, and I think it was an excellent conversation overall.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review on iTunes and share the show with other business owners who may be facing their own growth challenges. And if you own a professional services firm, consider joining our private community. The Staying Power Collective is a community where owners of accounting, law, and consulting firms discuss best practices for running and growing virtual businesses. You'll get access to our Slack group, and you'll have a Zoom meeting once a month with a small group of other firm owners. To apply for the group, head on over to www.stayingpowercollective.com and fill out the brief form. And if you have suggestions for future topics or guests, or if you have general questions or feedback, send us an email at contact@stayingpowercollective.com. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great rest of your week.